everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. If you'd like to join us here in the room, you'll find the schedule in our monthly newsletter and on my website at lindanickell.com/happiness hour. Tonight's guest is Brent Kollock. Brent is an artist and author with a deep passion for storytelling through various mediums. His work explores the narrative connection between people using photography, writing, and visual arts to captivate and engage viewers. Through his work, Brent offers meaningful, thoughtfully crafted pieces that invite reflection and dialogue. In tonight's presentation, Charreria, Mexico's national treasure. Brent will showcase captivating images, offering a deep dive into the vibrant culture, art, and traditions of Charreria. Recognized by UNESCO as part of Mexico's cultural heritage, Charreria embodies pride, timeless practice, and a connection to the past and future of Mexican identity. Brent will talk about the relationships he's built within the charro community and how his work captures the passion, excitement, and rich visual storytelling of this uniquely Mexican tradition. You can connect with Brent through his website at brentkollock.com. And if you're on Instagram, you can find him at Brent Kollock. Welcome to the Happiness Hour, Brent.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So let's just start off with, I said charreria 3 times, so I basically missed 4th times. So I mispronounced it 4 times. So how should it sound?
Well, as a Texan with my best Spanish, it's charrería.
I was close.
You're very close, very close. No,
Okay.
it's charrería. The charrería is the sport, and charreada is the event.
All right. So let's start with a little bit of how did you get here? So we had a guest on, John Gregor, and this was early last year, probably. And after John was here, I get an email from Brent saying, I've just, I'm working on a book. It'll be finished soon. I would love to share this topic. And I grew up in South Texas, so my Spanish is pretty limited, and I'm embarrassed to admit that, to a Mexican restaurant menu. Um, but I kind of thought I knew what it was. And after I got your email, I went and did a little bit of reading up on it, and I didn't know much at all. My guess was off. So this topic really interested me. And you then sent me some photos, and I was like, yes, please come in and talk about this. So with that, I did a brief intro for you. What did I miss? If you want to fill in the gaps, you're welcome to do that. Um, but otherwise,
Well,
letting you have the floor.
okay. Well, but I can give a little bit more about myself
Great.
prior to charrería. We'll make it short and sweet.
Sure.
I was born and raised in Texas, born in Houston, raised mostly in Dallas. I graduated from Southern Methodist University with a degree in painting and photography. And that was always kind of a battle at that time, was which one to pursue, but painting for whatever reason won out. And when I got out of school, I actually was in the enviable position of having some success almost immediately with painting. And I spent the next 20 years as working as a painter. And you always have to do something else. So I've worked as a carpenter, and I've done everything. So at some point, the contemporary art world we just weren't fitting together well. And so I kind of started falling back into photography a little bit. And I happened to get a few jobs doing a little photojournalistic type work. And I really enjoyed it. And, whether I have a knack or not, I don't know, but people responded pretty quickly, and it took off relatively, I don't want to say easily, but quickly. And it's kind of led me to where I am now, which is I sort of pursue longer term projects. And whether that manifests itself in a show or a book, or both. That's kind of the path that I've chosen that I really enjoy the most is doing long-term deeper dives into whatever the subject may be. Charreria is a great example. I've been shooting it for over 5 years now, and the book will be printed and on sale next month. So it's like right there. But in the end, I think it just goes to telling stories. And for me, the narrative was always the most important thing in painting, and it's the most important thing in photography for me. And it's one of the things I enjoy about longer term projects, especially putting together a book, is that you get to tell a story. And the sequencing and the selecting the pictures in which order and all that is a very, very much akin to telling a story. So I really kind of gravitated to that, and I've published a few zines, smaller photo books, and then I've published, I guess, 2 or 3 books of poetry that combines poetry and photography. And I think one of them is still on print, and you can get it on Amazon, but that's, but in the end, they were all telling stories. That's sort of my preference, if you will, is telling stories. So I came to Mexico. I mean, my family's been traveling back and forth forever. I mean, I've been coming to Mexico since the early 70s. And my folks retired here on the West Coast about 25, 26 years ago. And my father passed away about 10 years ago. So I started spending a little more time with my mother here, keeping an eye and making sure she was okay. And then I guess in 2019, I was back in Dallas working, and she had an accident and broke her neck. So she has a very diminished mobility. So I was spending a lot more time here. And then when COVID happened, there was so much uncertainty with the travel. I just said, you know what? I just got to stay here. And that's pretty much it. I've been back to Texas once in the last 5+ years now. Mexico's great. I mean, there's never a dull moment, and there's always something to do that, in terms of photography, there's always something to do. And I've got 3 or 4 projects ongoing at the same time. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here. And the differences are pretty massive in terms of shooting in the US versus shooting here. I'll give you a quick anecdote. I was working for, I don't know who I was stringing for. Maybe it was Getty or somebody, and they wanted me to go photograph part of the Fort Worth Stock Show Rodeo. And I was like, yeah, great, I can do that. And when you get there, you're assigned a handler, basically, who says, okay, what are you trying to shoot? And they basically take you around and make sure you don't get in trouble and don't go where you're not supposed to go, because it's a high liability situation. And so that was kind of what I was used to. And then I get to Mexico, and one of the first charrerias I went to, I started talking to a guy who was a charro who spoke fairly good English. And he said, hey, you want to come down here with me? Like on the other side of the wall. I'm like, am I allowed to do that? And he's, yeah, sure, come on. So the rule in Mexico is if you do it, it's on you. So if you get hurt, you won't do it again. Mm-hmm. So it's a completely different world in terms of access, which was a very interesting and very different proposition, but one that I enjoy because I like being close. I've always enjoyed being close to the people I'm shooting. So that was a big bonus for me. I really, really, really enjoy shooting in Mexico. And I encourage anybody who wants to go shoot anywhere, just do it. Just go, take your camera, talk to people. It's amazing how much people want to share their story and talk to you. And that was always the thing that kind of amazed me about particularly Mexico. Now, Mexican people tend to be very open and warm and friendly, but I can go to any kind of an event and I talk to one person and all of a sudden I'm everybody's best friend. And it's fantastic. I really, really love it. I had put a few notes in here about the way I shoot, because I think I won't go into great technical detail because I'm not a technical guy, but when I first started shooting, obviously it was on film. and I've always loved film. But when I started shooting digital, was kind of early on, and I just was never thrilled with letting some decisions be made by the camera in terms of focus and all those things. So I kind of adopted a very hybrid, shooting mirrorless cameras with old glass that's all manual focus. And the pictures I'm going to show you today are all the black and white was shot with very old Nikon glass that I've had since the 80s. And people are always kind of amazed that, oh, you don't use autofocus. And I'm like, well, I kind of do now because my vision's not as what it used to be. But yeah, I think they call that hybrid shooting. Am I correct? It's manual, it's old manual equipment strapped to modern, digital cameras. Just something that works for me, and I love the look of old glass. New glass is too good. It's too good for my bad eyes. So I'm okay with that. And I'm like I said, I'm not a techie guy. I'm always more interested in the content of the picture than the fidelity, shall we say. But I always try and be as have as much fidelity as I can. But it's not my strong suit. I think I have better talents elsewhere. So that's kind of how I came to that position, and that's still where I am. I shoot old Sony mirrorless cameras with Nikon AI glass, and none of it's expensive. So if I break it or lose it, I don't freak out, because I look at new camera prices and I'm just like, oh my God, who's buying these? Anyway, so the projects that I'm working on, Charreria is kind of an ongoing one. I'd like to do another longer term project with the girls have a separate sport within Charreria called escaramuza, which is kind of a precision team riding, and they wear these really elaborate costumes, and they're fantastic horsewomen. I mean, they are very good horsewomen, but I think that kind of deserves a different vibe than what I shot. The book is all black and white. They have to be color, so that's certainly a project. I've been kind of mulling over doing large scale portraits of the people who participate in Charreria, because they really are a very picturesque, the costumes and the these very handsome men and these very beautiful women. It's interesting. And I have two or three other projects. I have one on lucha libre, the Mexican wrestling, which is never a dull moment there. And I have another one on what's called jaripeo, which is, if you can imagine a concert with ranchero music and dancing and drinking and food and just a general good time. And right in the middle of it, they build a temporary ring and do bull riding. And it gets pretty unhinged, and it's very Mexican. It's very fun. It's not always safe, but it's always great fun. And then I have another one that's kind of more in the starting phases of doing these very interesting festivals that you go, into this, particularly in the South, that has a very strange collection of the sort of mestizo animist religion mixed with the sort of Mexican Catholicism. And some of them are very pre-Columbian, and some of them are, a mixture of the Mexican Catholic Church, which is very mystical anyway, with the sort of animist religion prior to the Catholic Church being here. And they are some of the most interesting, and it's things I never even knew about. And I traveled in Mexico most of my life, and I don't think people appreciate the sort of, I didn't appreciate the sort of depth and interesting and strangeness of a lot of this history of Mexico and current Mexico. So that's been really fun. It's a little more difficult because there's no schedule of events. You kind of got to know somebody who knows somebody. And I've connected with the anthropology department at the UNAM, the big Polytechnic University in Mexico City. And they've been very helpful. But again, they didn't know me from Adam, and I told him what I wanted to do, and he said, "Yeah, here, let's talk about it." And they were just incredibly helpful. So that's where I am now, and I stumbled into Charreria. Basically, I was here before COVID, and I was looking for things to shoot. I just wanted something to do to keep me busy. And a friend of mine said, "Oh, you should go see this event tomorrow night or whatever. It's called Caballo Bailar, dancing horses." And I thought, well, how can you go wrong there, right? So I went and saw that, and it was very interesting, very beautiful. And I met one of the guys, and he said, "Hey, we're having a charreada tomorrow. You definitely have to see that." And it was at the same venue, so I went the next day, and it just completely blew me away. And it was like, wow, so this is what it is. So that's how I got started. That was probably 2018, and I published a zine where it had a little article. Maybe it was 20, 25 pictures about Charreria. That was 2019, maybe. And then I knew that wasn't enough, and I really wanted to take a deeper dive. So that's when I decided to make the book, and that's been the last, 5+ years of shooting. So that's where we are today.
Okay. Do you want to start sharing your screen so we can see some of those photos?
Sure, sure. So this is the cover of the book, and this is Charreria it's basically teams competing against other teams. It's not an individual sport. Well, there is an individual, but that's not really the gist of it. So each team competes in a series of 7 or 9 events. And the final event, which is what's pictured here, is called Paso de Muerte, the step of death. And the rider, you see, is on a horse with no saddle, only reins. And he has to go from his horse to another horse with nothing, no ride, no bridle, no reins, no saddle, while both horses are being spurred on by his teammate. You can see him in the back. And they get going full gallop around this ring, which is circular. And he has to jump from one horse to the other, and the other horse is wild, and ride it around in order to get the points. So that's everybody's favorite event. And that's just a photograph that just always kind of stuck with me. And again, this was shot with a 24mm lens, so you can guess how close I was. And it's not cropped. Oh, maybe a little bit for the format, but yeah, it was shot with an old 24mm, probably set at f11 and hyperfocal. So very, very old school photojournalistic type style. So there's the cover. It's called Mexico's National Treasure. And the history of Charreria is very interesting. That the first cowboys in the Americas were in Mexico, and they were charros. And so that's kind of, the genesis of all cowboys comes out of central Mexico. So that was a very interesting thing for me, being a Texan. And, we think we invented cowboys, but most of the cowboys were Mexican. Actually, even the ones that worked in Texas, a lot of them were from Mexico. Anyway, so that's the cover. So we'll start on this is another image from Charreria that is an event where they have to rope a mare that runs around the ring. Some people don't, they don't approve of the way they do it. I'm not going to go into the whole sort of, animal aspect of it, but they really do take good care of the animals in Mexico because they're a valuable commodity. So I was pleased to see that. But this is an event called Manganas a Caballo. So he's roping a mare running at full speed while on the back of a horse. So that's a bit of a challenge, you could say. And most of these were shot. I have a tendency to go away from the big events and more into the local community, smaller events kind of out in the country. I don't know why. Maybe it's my sort of, I don't want to say sentimentality of it, but when you get into the big events, they look a lot like American rodeo with all the advertising and the sort of circumstance and pomp. But in the country, it's still very much done by amateurs and people who keep the traditions alive. And I find that very appealing. So most of these were shot. Like this was shot at a fairly big event. So it's in an arena. I remember this was out in a little town called Las Palmas, which is just a dusty little town. It's kind of a county seat for a bunch of ranching communities. Anyway. This is a bull rider who I've actually become quite good friends with, and he is up in a city called Tepic, which is a couple hours north of me. But just an interesting guy. And in putting this book together, I wanted to sort of contextualize the sport because it's more than a sport. It's kind of an identity and kind of a living history of Mexico. But I didn't know what to write, and which is unusual for me because I'm usually pretty full of it. But he and I were talking one day, and he was going on and on about how much charreria means to him and how it's such an important part of his life. And I just said, Mike, would you write something for my book? And he said, oh, yeah, I'd love to do it. So in the end, I have 10 different people from within the community writing little pieces where I asked them the same two questions, which was, what does charreria mean to you? And what does charreria mean to the history of Mexico or the identity of Mexico? And it's amazing how consistent the answers were, but they're all slightly different. And they range from local, amateur guys and girls to, the current or, multinational champion cowboys to, there's a woman actually who contributed named Anna Besserell. And I found out later, much later, that her family has had land grants in Mexico since the King of Spain was giving out land grants. So her family's been involved in this since the very beginning. Fascinating woman. Anyway, so there's 10 different contributors, if you will, who wrote little pieces that talks about charreria in their eyes, which I thought was quite interesting. And I was, again, I asked and I never had anyone say no. So that's another very positive sign. So this is the same event of roping, but it's instead of manganas a caballo, instead of being on a horse, it's manganas a pie. So he's on foot. And he has to go through, when they do these roping events, they have to go through certain moves and tricks, I guess you could call it. And then there's a lot of sort of freelancing in between. And these ropes are works of art. I mean, the ropes themselves are handmade from, the fibers of the agave, and they're heavy and they're these beautiful things. And these guys just make it look so easy. I mean, it's amazing to watch. And hopefully the photographs, I'll say doing all this in black and white for me kind of gives a timelessness to it, that it could have been 1910 and it could have been 2010, which I really like because they're very diligently trying to keep charreria from becoming too commercial. They don't want the competitors to have sponsorship all over their bodies, and so which I appreciate that. I think that's a very noble cause, but there's always concessions. So, and again, charreria tends to be a sport of people who have some means. This is it definitely throughout history. There's a very kind of interesting history of Mexico tied up in the whole hierarchy of charreria. And anyway, he's a local guy, very good. And his profession is he's an agave farmer up near Tequila. So all tequila that's called tequila, has to be made in Tequila, Mexico. And he farms a lot of agave. He has hundreds and hundreds of hectares of agave plants. So he's a farmer, but he does charreria. It's like his passion. So this is Manganas a Pie again. And this man was the 8 times national champion. His father actually contributed to the book. And his father he was a 2 times national champion, but he's kind of regarded as the man who took charreria into a more modern professional environment. His name is Nito Aceves. And I'll tell a quick story about Nito. Nito would be the equivalent of, I don't know, maybe Larry Bird, that he kind of brought a real modern take on the sport and turned the charro from a kind of an amateur to a professional. And Nito is a very important figure in charreria. He's a little younger than I am. And so I was talking with a friend of mine in California who has a podcast about charreria. And I said, I'm trying to get people to write for my book. And he said, well, who do you want? And I mentioned this man in the picture. His name is Chiringas Aceves. I said, I'd love to get Chiringas. He said, well, I don't know Chiringas, but I know his father. Let me talk to him and see if he's interested. 5 minutes later, I get a message. Here's Nito's phone number. Call him. Can you imagine that? Someone that important in a sport, and just boom, you call him. Anyway, long story short, my assistant who speaks fluent Spanish, she's a Mexican. She called him and he said, I'm going to be in your area in 2 weeks for a big event. Let's meet. So we set up a time and place. Sure enough, he rides up on his horse. We talk for 20 or 30 minutes. He says, whatever you need, I'll help you. And now every time I see him, he gives me a hug like I'm his brother. And, it's an amazing thing how much they care and how accessible they are and just how generous they are. He didn't have to do anything for me. But yeah, anyway, great guys. And Chiringas is an amazing guy. He's 27 years old, 8 times national champion, and phenomenal cowboy. I mean, just an amazing charro. This is something that's kind of inspired the idea for another project of the one about portraits. This is a horse trainer and a horseman named Cuco Raya. And Cuco is considered the greatest horse trainer in Mexico. And he just has that swagger. I mean, you see, and he's the most unassuming, calm, demure person. But when he walks with a kind of pride, a kind of, like I said, a kind of swagger, and just the nicest guy in the world. And he does an event called Calas, and he's one of the 2 best in Mexico, and he's just an amazing guy. And I love this picture of him. It's a perfect picture of a perfect charro. Now, I wanted to show a few in color. These are not in the book, obviously, because they're in color, but just so you see kind of a modern context of what charreria is. And these were all shot, I think, well, it doesn't matter when, but again, these sort of smaller venues, which I find more picturesque. There's a couple of bull riders for you getting ready. You can always tell the bull riders from the seat of their pants because the animals get sweaty and dusty, and yeah, you get on them. But I mean, their clothes are just. I mean, I love their clothes, the leather pants and the chaparreros and the cravatas, the ties. They really are amazing. They all dress. I mean, it's an event. They all get dressed up. It's almost like they're going out for a social event, but they're going out to do this, and it's amazing to see. This is another event within Charreria that's called Piales. And basically, there's a mare is pushed down a wall that's 60 meters long, and this charro has to rope its hind legs and bring it to a halt. They don't take the animal down; they just have to stop it from running. And it's unbelievable that they can do it because that horse is going full blast. And they use the horn of the saddle as a brake. They actually wrap the rope around it, and it creates this crazy smoke. And in the smell of that agave fiber, the ropes are called sogas, and the smell of it, it's like nothing you've ever. It's really an incredible thing. And again, this is a more of a local thing. But anyway, one of my favorite events, just because it's so dramatic. They have to have the extra flair with the smoke and the noise. Sometimes the ropes will snap and go flying past your head, and you definitely, one of the things you watch out for. There you can see him getting the rope ready. Those ropes are probably, gosh, I want to say they're 20 meters maybe. So they're big, heavy things, and the horse will pull all 20 meters of it out and anyway. You can kind of see how it's put together. They really are, and they're quite expensive as well. this is the manganas a caballo. So he's roping on the back of the horse. I love that horse. I just thought that was kind of a beautiful animal. But you can see the advertisements on the buildings, but the competitors themselves don't really advertise. They're not really allowed to, which I think is kind of nice. And this is a female competitor that the sport's called escaramuza. That is a separate story, and I think it's something that demands a separate approach. But I definitely wanted to include one of the female competitors, because if you're ever anywhere and you see a charreada, I highly recommend going, and they'll always have escaramuzas competing. They compete during the events with the men, and they ride side saddle, and they wear these incredible costumes, and they're all handmade, really remarkable things. But what amazes me is they ride side saddle full blast, and they're doing this precision riding. It's pretty incredible to see. And I just wanted to include one because I think it's a very, very a beautiful, very different, but very beautiful aspect of charreria. And that, I believe, is the last photograph. I have more if anybody wants to see any other events or any other snippets of other projects, but I know this was the main focus, so I'm happy to leave it there if that's okay, if that's what you want.
I would like to see more photos. I felt
Oh,
like
really?
I felt like you just got started and now you're telling me it's over. So,
Okay.
okay, but
Okay.
before you do that, let me ask a
Sure.
question that
Of
Mika had
course.
put in the chat. She wanted to know if you could tell us what age these they start training.
Oh yeah, sure. My experience is that they start training quite young.
Okay.
Typically, well, I'll tell you kind of a funny story with the escaramuzas with the girls. When they're too small to ride a horse, they actually have a stick horse. A horse on a like a stick. What do they call that? A hobby horse or something?
Mm-hmm.
And they actually do it. They do the sort of precision riding and doing the different formations with a stick horse. And those kids are probably 5, 6 years old. So they're a little small to be getting on a horse. But the girls probably start training on a horse about the same time the boys do. They're probably 6, 7, 8 years old. Yeah, for sure.
That's really
And
young.
then they actually have a national championship for they call it infantil. So it's the youth championship. And I think you have to be under the age of 16. And some of these kids are pretty amazing. I mean, you see a 15-year-old kid, riding a bull or doing, manganas a caballo, and they're very good. I'm always amazed by it because, anyway, yeah. So they start fairly young. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you've got those photos handy, why don't you
For sure.
share some of the stuff you've got? There you go.
Okay, so this is another project which is probably going to be the next book. It's called Jaripeo. It's the one with the bull riding in the middle of the concert and the dance. And it's I mean, I've seen bull riding in the US, and this is like completely different because you get better scores if you don't use your hands, if you can imagine. And these guys are fearless kamikazes. I mean, they are amazing. And again, the nicest group of people I've ever met. You know, I just walked, I went to a couple of events and I met a few people. In fact, one of the charros that I know, he provides bulls to these events. He's a rancher. So he said, "Oh, well, why don't you just come with me? I'll introduce you and show you around." And now, before the event, they do the introductions where they introduce the different riders, and they all have these sort of nicknames like the Mosca from Nayarit or whatever. It's a bit like wrestling in a way, but anyway. And they do a prayer, and they all have their little rituals. You can see his little his prayer cards on the ground, and they'll make a cross in the dirt. It's all very interesting to me. And so I'm inside the ring with these guys. I mean, I know them all now, and they just say, "Yeah, come on in, let's do it." So again, it's a very different world here in terms of getting access to people and things. And again, I'm inside the ring with them, and this is during the introductions. Another guy that I've gotten to know quite well, and he's, I don't know, maybe he's 20 years old, and they really are fearless. They're really interesting, remarkable. Some would say machismo young men, and there's plenty of that. But there you can see riding without hands, and it's pretty amazing. And these are all shot 50 millimeter. I've decided I was going to do a whole book using nothing but a 50 millimeter lens. So you can gauge the closeness. I've actually been kicked at one of these events. I was outside the fence, kind of down on my knees to not block the people behind me. And I'm looking through the viewfinder, and of course there's no depth of field. And the bull got so close, and he turned real quick to his left, my right, and his foot went through the pipe fence and caught me in the side of the face and about knocked me out. Fortunately, it didn't hit my camera. So there you go. You can see it gets a little chaotic, but just, yeah, it's a very interesting event. I love it. I think it's fantastic. It is dangerous, though. I have to concede that. I've seen a few. I haven't seen a lot of injuries, but you see a few. And these bulls are prized possessions because these are very valuable animals. They take really good care of these bulls. There you go. That's it in a nutshell. The guy on the bull is the guy in the blue shirt with the long sleeve blue shirt. That's his brother. So his brother's trying to get the bull to buck more. So he's in there prodding the bull on. And the bull started chasing anyway. It just completely goes unhinged, which I love a bit of chaos. And then the next big book, which I've actually been working on it for a couple of years now, is about lucha libre, which is Mexican wrestling. I'm sure everybody knows about that. And it is the strangest, most interesting subculture. It's very, very strange. And the history of it is very fascinating. And I'm in an area that's not really a hotbed, so I have to go to Guadalajara or I have to go to Mexico City. That's a rough life. But you can go to venues that are modern American standard, or you can go to ones that are hot and sweaty, and there's fights in the crowd, and people throwing beer everywhere. It's always interesting, but I love it. I think it's great fun, and I've met so many nice people that were fighters and referees and promoters, and they're all characters. And it's very much a telenovela, it really is. And we'll call it an acrobatic telenovela. And again, I'm basically inside the ring with my camera. This was shot 24 millimeters, so you can see how close I am. And the guy who was the promoter of this event was actually an Italian. And we started talking about soccer, I think. And I told him, I said, hey, I don't have any press credentials anymore. I don't really do that, but I'm putting together a book. And he went and saw my work, and he said, look, I'll take care of you, whatever you want. So he basically let me get in the ring. I mean, I'm literally holding my camera in the ring. And I can't imagine doing that anywhere else. And it is a very, very much a spectacle, as you can see. Yeah, just so much fun, and just some of the most interesting, events and places and people. And everybody, I get asked a lot, do you ever feel unsafe? I mean, Mexico certainly has a bit of a bad reputation. I've never felt unsafe, not once. And I've been in places maybe that I shouldn't have been, but everybody's, I've just never had a problem. I mean, my golden rule about traveling is if you're looking for trouble, you'll find it. I mean, whether it's drugs or sex or whatever. So just don't even think about it. But if you're just a person out having a good time, Mexico is very safe. I've never had a problem. And that is the end of that. I have more charreria pictures if you'd like to see a few more of those.
Well, I'm going to say, let's go ahead and close out the session, because I would have liked to right after the first part of it, but I think that was a good, I think you gave us a great an overall glimpse of what you're experiencing. Tell us about, let me ask you, because now I'm just being selfish.
Sure.
Tell us about the book and what made you decide I need to do this. I mean, I know that you're a writer, you're a photographer. It just seems like it's a perfect project to marry yourself to. But
Sure.
there's one thing to have the idea. There's another part of it when you have to motivate yourself to say, I'm gonna do this and I'm just gonna start. So can you walk me through
Yeah.
that thought process?
Yeah. I mean, just basically for me, making art when I was painting and drawing, it always seemed a bit, I don't want to use the word because I'm not trying to make myself look good or bad, but there was always a kind of exclusivity because of cost. I mean, you making art is, buying art is an expensive endeavor if you're buying original artwork. And it's not that I had kind of an imposter complex. It's not that at all. I just always felt like I wanted to share the stories more. And so when I started doing photography, when it was sort of photojournalistic, and that was great. But it was one picture or two pictures, whether it was this event or that event. And I always was drawn to people who I thought were better visual storytellers, like W. Eugene Smith or, Sebastião Salgado. Some people I've even met who I admire greatly as photographers. And I loved the idea of telling a story of a specific event in time and place in pictures. And so when I first kind of had these ideas, I was doing very crude layout, very crude design, and what I guess you'd call a zine. And the printing quality it's not bad, but it's not great. And I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the process of learning to do layout and use InDesign and all, because I'm not a real tech person. But it's become so accessible that I thought, well, I can learn to do this. And I did. I'm not saying I'm great at it, but I'm proficient. And so then you have the added kind of advantage or the added tool of being able to do interesting layout. And so the idea to make a book sort of sprung from the idea of wanting to share that story, which I found so interesting in Charreria, with more people. And even selling photographic prints, it's not inexpensive. I mean, to do a really good, high quality, 16 by 20 digital print, it costs money. And I thought, well, but if I can sell a book for $50 or $60 that's got 108 pages, that's how many pages is in this book, and it's over 120 images. To me, that's like a more complete telling of a story. And I really, really gravitated that direction pretty quickly. Yeah.
So how long from starting to finish? I know you've been photographing these events for almost a little over 5 years. How long has it
Yeah.
taken you to compile and cull down and select those photos and create this where you can pass it off to a printer?
Yeah, sure. I would say that was I probably spent 4 to 6 months. I mean, I have thousands of pictures
Oh yeah.
I've probably photographed 100 and over 100 events. And a charreria can last for 2 or 3 days. I mean, like, let's say it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday. There may be 3 separate charrerias on Saturday. Each one has 3 or 4 teams. And then there's a big final on Sunday. So to me, a charreria is an event, but it may have 2 or 3 days of competition. And yeah, I mean, you come back from an event like that, and you've got 400 or 500 pictures on a card. And then I try and cull them down to maybe the best 50 or 60. But even then, if you've got 100 of them, that's 5,000 or 6,000 images.
Yeah.
It's funny, once you've looked at the pictures a lot, the ones that that should be in the book, they should be in the book. They just stand out. Like,
Yeah.
yep, that one.
Yep. Yep.
And that's kind of a something that just comes with time. And then the most kind of, to me, the most important thing is if I put it down for a week and come back, I still think those are the right pictures. There's not a lot of second guessing at a certain point. And for someone who made paintings where I was constantly, changing,
Sure.
you can go too far.
All right. So tell us how we can find this book. Where are you going to market it through?
Well, initially it'll just be through my website.
Perfect. Okay.
And if you live in the United States or Mexico, it's just going to be one price, and that'll include shipping, just to make my life easy. Because I have somebody who will be doing my shipping in the U.S. because I'm just not there.
Okay.
And it should be, the good thing about the U.S. is you've got media mail, and media mail is a great invention. And so, yeah, it'll be through the website. Eventually, I've been kind of pondering whether to sell it on Amazon. Amazon has pros and cons. And then I'm doing I'll be doing some publicity stuff that I'm setting up now with like book signings. Like I've got a couple of them in North Texas, Dallas, Fort Worth. If anybody has any ideas of places, and in Houston, San Antonio, Austin, anywhere, I'm all ears. I'm all ears on it.
I was going to say, I think that we had that conversation and I sent you a list for
Yes.
all.
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the other cities, but there are a lot of people in this room and maybe they have some ideas. And if so, BrentKollock.com. Okay.
Well,
So,
the other thing I would say is if you go to the website, or if I think I posted my email address, which I'm perfectly fine with people emailing. I do a newsletter every month or 6 weeks.
Okay.
Kind of let you know what I'm up to. And then when there's big news, like, okay, the book's on sale today, that's the way I like to do that. Yeah, for sure. So please send me, you can sign up via the website, or just send me an email or a message on Instagram or wherever, and I'll sign you up. No problem.
Okay. All right. There's a question that Mika snuck in here.
Sure.
She says, I haven't seen your books yet, but I'm looking forward to it. What is your style? Are they photo essays, or do you write about the stories behind the photos?
That's a good question. I would probably have to say it's a photo essay. The writing for me in this particular case was to contextualize it through the eyes of the people who do it, to kind of better understand the importance of it to someone who doesn't know anything about it. Because I certainly didn't know anything about it. And I'm always kind of blown away by the history of it. Now, something like Lucha Libre or Jaripeo, where it's, I don't know how I would handle it. It would probably be much more of a who, what, when, where. This is what I did. This is when I did it. And this is why. I don't know. My writing, I'm not making excuses, but I tend to be more comfortable writing things like poetry where there are fewer, restrictions, let's say. And actually, I do have a book that's supposed to come out before the end of the year, which is photographs I made with a little toy camera, it's like a Holga, of the coastline pretty here where I live. And then it's a bunch of my writing. It's called Sea Glass and Mermaid Bones. And it's just kind of my thoughts about being here and going through COVID and all this other nonsense. But stay tuned.
Okay. Well, Brent, I'm going to speak for the group here. This was this was interesting. Your photos were so there's one or two people in here. One in particular, she photographs for her for a school. And the action shots really caught her attention because that's one of the things that she struggles with. So it's kind of fun to see, oh, that's what they should look like, or that's what they could look like. Your photos were beautiful. The stories behind them were interesting. And I can only imagine, and I wish you success with your book. And oh, wait a minute, you have a proof. That's right. Lift it up a little bit, take your fingers off. There you go. There you go. Char.
It's
Let me say it. What? Let me mispronounce it one more time. Charreria.
charreria.
Yeah. All
Let
right.
me actually, here's an example. This is a page with some writing, and that's a local, I'm sorry for the glare, it's a satin paper.
Yeah.
So it's a picture of the charro, and then he answers the two questions I asked,
Okay.
kind of gives his take on it all. So
Okay.
not necessarily my writing, but probably tells a better story.
Yeah. I think the combination of those makes for a more interesting and more well-rounded
I hope
story.
so.
Of,
Yeah, I hope
you
so.
know,
Yeah.
it's not just from your point of view as a spectator, but theirs as a participant. And it's not
Sure.
they're participating, that's their life. That's just
100%.
yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
All right. Well, Brent, thank you so much for coming and sharing
My
and
pleasure. Thank
reaching
you.
out to me and asking to come and share your story. So this was wonderful, just wonderful. All right.
Thank you so much.
You're
I hope
welcome.
to hear from everybody, and please let me know if you want to get on the newsletter. I'm happy to add anybody that wants to.
Sounds great. Well, hang on just a second. Let me close it out and we'll do an open chat again. All right.
Okay.
Next week, if okay, let me start with if you received the March Happiness Hour newsletter. I wrote kind of a little behind the scenes of how I came into photography a little bit more seriously. So next week, Mark Franks, who is one of those people that inspired me to figure out how to use my camera and be a better photographer. He's going to be here to share his presentation. Art is where you find it. And until next time, go out and create something beautiful and hope that we see you again soon.